All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. The Source Water Collaborative and the Southeastern Partnership for Forests and Water would like to welcome you to our webinar today. It's called From Plans to Protection, Utilities Safeguarding Source Waters. And this webinar is part of a series called Stronger Together, Landscape Partnerships for Drinking Water Protection. You may have already attended our previous webinars about forests and water partnerships and about tools and resources to advance collaboration. Many of these are on the Source Water Collaborative's YouTube channel and or the webinars and resources page of our website. And we'll also put a link in the chat and also in our notes so that you can access those later as well. My name is, I'm Jeff Lerner, and I work for EPA's Office of Water, and I'm also a co-chair of the Source Water Collaborative subgroup on Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act integration work. Source water protection and preventing or addressing non-point source pollution often go hand in hand, just as the integrity of our forests and water go hand in hand. The Source Water Collaborative is a national organization that's dedicated to advancing drinking water source protection. You can see on this slide that there are 31 members here listed. They include nonprofit organizations, they include federal agencies. We all work together on these common objectives and goals. And you can find more information about the Source Water Collaborative on its website, listed at the bottom of the page here. And that includes toolkits and reports, more webinars, and dozens of affiliated collaboratives at the state, local, and regional or watershed scale, like the ones that you're going to hear about today. Oops, sorry about that. Go back one. The Source Water Collaborative is celebrating 20 years of collaboration this year. And we wanted to share this message from our co-chairs, David Laughlin with the National Rural Water Association and Adam Carpenter with the American Water Works Association. Their message, which you can read for yourself here on the screen, is essentially about how we work together as partners around a shared responsibility to protect drinking water sources in ways that are practical and impactful and also lasting. And I also want to mention that we're joined in this effort and this webinar by Kathy Hawes, who is the coordinator of the Southeastern Partnership for Forests and Water, which is a regional initiative that fosters collaboration to conserve and manage private forest lands for drinking water protection. And I want to make sure that we publicly thank Kathy for all of her work assembling this webinar series. So today's webinar, here's the agenda, is From Plans to Protection, Utilities Safeguarding Source Waters. And it is episode number 4 of the series. And for any of you that are Star Wars fans out there, and I know that some of you are, you know that the original Star Wars movie was actually called episode number 4, A New Hope. And we, I think, are also offering some hope and inspiration for source water protection with today's presentations. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to give you 2 different flavors of utility-led watershed protection. And along the way, you're going to hear about collaboration across a watershed, outside and even within water utilities. You'll hear about increased capacity. In fact, both of the watersheds here were recipients of Healthy Watersheds Consortium capacity building grants that EPA once supported to accelerate watershed protection. And we're really thrilled to see their continued success. You'll also hear about protection and management outcomes on significant forested acres within these watersheds. You'll hear about finance and funding mechanisms and how those mechanisms are being leveraged. And so if success leads to success, you can also say that securing funding can also lead to more funding. And EPA, I will also say, supports the idea of watershed financing partnerships. And some of what you're going to be hearing about today are really good fits for that concept. And you'll also hear about how these are long-term commitments within a watershed to its health. These are not quick fixes that we're talking about. These are years of investment, but you can accelerate the pace of conservation in a watershed, and we'll see and hear about that today. And so excuse me. So we'll follow up this webinar with slides and links and a recording. And we hope to hear from and learn from you in the process. And as you watch this, please post your questions and comments in the chat, and also let us know what additional information we can provide that will make this a more tangible endeavor for you and your partners. And if we've timed things right, we should have time for some Q&A at the end, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can or provide answers in our follow-up email. And so to help pilot you through these examples, we now have two experts in watershed protection. We'll begin with a presentation from Brian Rupar, who's the Watershed Protection Manager with the Central Arkansas Water, who will share the protection and management of land in their water supply and the evolution of his team at the water utility. Followed by Paul Thomas Hunt, the Environment Manager with Portland Water District, who will talk about their accelerating protection efforts as part of Sebago Clean Waters. As Paul recently has now announced his retirement, I also want to encourage you to ask him as many questions as you can. Kyra Jacobs on our EPA team is going to drop some additional information in the chat about these speakers as we get going. And so now I'd like to stop sharing and turn it over to Brian so he can begin his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm assuming everyone can see my slide presentation now?
We can. It looks great. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm Brian Rupar. I have the privilege of being the Watershed Protection Manager for Central Arkansas Water. I've been with the utility for 6 years. I have a background in natural resource management. I have a master's degree in forest resource management. And I've spent now over 2 decades managing forest lands across a variety of landscapes. And as Jeff kind of alluded to, I'm here today because of our grant from the Healthy Watershed Consortium. It created my original position and allowed me the chance to do some amazing work with this team and then stick around and continue the work. So I want to share with you a little bit about our utility and what we do for watershed protection. We're the water utility that serves 500,000 Arkansans. That's 1 in 6 people in our state. And we supply that water from 2 source water lakes. Our program goals are protect, restore, and enhance our natural watershed environment. And we'll talk about the variety of methods throughout this talk that we do to both try to maintain the ecological integrity of the system and to improve the runoff that goes into our system. Now they're called lakes, but these are man-made reservoirs. Our original was the smaller Lake Winona that you see in the bottom left. That's an ideal watershed. It is 99% conserved between ownership of the U.S. Forest Service and Central Arkansas Water. And then Lake Maumelle was built about 20 years later to handle the increased demand of a growing population in the Little Rock and surrounding communities. Why do we have a watershed program? Healthy forests equal healthy water. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, that the better water quality we can maintain going into our source water reservoirs, the cheaper it's going to be to treat, and the longer it'll be a viable water source for our utility. In 2005, our utility got together with a bunch, 22 different stakeholders, an outside consulting group, and developed our Lake Maumelle Watershed Management Plan. Since then, we've had a multitude of plans spawn from that include our 8 major areas of how we manage our source water, and you'll see them listed here. And I'll kind of take those one at a time and talk to you about how we address each of those areas in our utility. One thing that we rely on is some dedicated capital funding. As part of that process, they interviewed some stakeholders and said, would you be willing to spend a little bit of money each month to protect your source water? And they talked about the importance of it. And this fee originally started out at 45 cents. In about, I think 2011 was the first year it was enacted. It was later increased by 15 cents over the course of a 3-year period. It's now on your standard household meter pays 90 cents a month for a watershed protection fee. And that generates a little bit, around $2 million a year for our watershed protection program that we can use to carry out the activities identified in the source water protection plan. One thing that dedicated funding allows us to do is we're able to leverage those funds and issue the first ever certified green bond in 2020 for the protection of forest lands. It was a mixed bond where it was $30 million, $20 million was for our standard gray infrastructure for the utility, and $10 million was to refinance some previous land purchases and then have $6 million for new land purchases. The green bond allowed us to borrow money ahead of time on that fund. As, land values are growing faster than the interest rate on that bond. It allowed us a lot of great press publication. It also got us a little bit better rate on our gray bond portion and saved the utility money on those debt services. And in addition to the people that came before me that I'm really just standing on their shoulders, these are the people that carry out our day-to-day work. This is our watershed protection team, the professionals that I get the joy of working with. They don't just love the outdoors because it's their job. That's where they recreate. And we have a lake manager, we have a land manager, we have a new natural resource specialist to oversee some federal grants we just received. We have a natural resource specialist and a technician that handle our monitoring, and then we have 2 watershed technicians that do the day-to-day ground operations. All these people are part of our prescribed fire team. We all help on group projects or in times a year when one program area needs the additional manpower, and all work towards our mission of improving our source water quality. Land acquisition is one of our areas. In 2024, we used that green bond to leverage against a federal forest legacy grant, and we're able to purchase an additional 2,000 acres. You'll see in the purple block on the left-hand side of your stream. That protects the riparian buffer of our main tributary, the Maumelle River. And in addition to that, the blobs in red, we have 2 pending forest legacy grants, which are another $14 million investment in land fee title purchases in our watershed to protect additional tributaries. We conduct restoration. We purchased an old sod farm that was on the banks of the Maumelle River. We'd worked for over 10 years with the Corps of Engineers to come up with a 206 project there for the ecological restoration and reconnect floodplains, get that runoff, remove the channelization, get the water to flow back on the floodplains, let that sediment nutrient settle out back on the floodplain where they belong, reforest those old sod fields, stop the nutrient inputs, and put it back into bottomland hardwood forests. Also for restoration, we partner with our local drinking water collaborative, the Arkansas Forest and Drinking Water Collaborative. At that same sod farm, we had some area already disturbed with water service available. We donated that land to the Community Project, where we take bare root seedlings and grow them out into larger potted plants that can be used for restoration projects along our tributaries and neighboring watersheds as well. And, you know, seedling survival is one of the biggest keys to a successful restoration project on our riparian areas. This allows us to plant some local genotype native plants and give those um, trees a head start. We have a monitoring team, and to help with that capacity, we have water ambassadors, which are our interns for the summer. We had three of them that spent a various amount of time in the watershed, and they help with everything from rare species plant community monitoring. They help us clear our fire lines for our prescribed fire program, water sampling, and then you'll see them doing some macroinvertebrate sampling in our streams as well. Another one of our 8 program areas is education and outreach. We hold a lake sweep event every year where we invite the public out to our marina. We feed them lunch, and we have a trash derby basically. And this past year we collected almost 250 tires, removed 50 yards of trash, and even our state Department of Transportation was out cleaning up the roadsides on that day in our watershed. And then we host a variety of tours. We have our Forest to Faucet tours where we bring out a variety of age groups, local civic leaders, elected officials, and talk to them in our utility. We bring them out to the watershed, show them our forest and our forest management and what we think a healthy, resilient forest looks like, and why we put so much emphasis on protecting those and improving our forest health, and then take them all the way to our treatment plants and then our distribution system and educate them on where their water comes from. We do native seed collections with our local master gardeners and master naturalists and help use those for restoration activities and plant native gardens around some of our facilities. We bring out international fire practitioners to show them why in the world we're using prescribed fire to make healthy drinking water. And then in the lower right, you'll see some local civic groups, the Ozark Society, where we give them tours about how we sample our lakes so we have advance notice of um, when changes in water quality parameters happen. We have an emergency response program. We recently conducted a spill response drill. We have an oil pipeline that runs along the north side of our main reservoir, Lake Maumelle, and it ruptured 14 years ago. And since then, we have had some procedures in place. If that ever becomes reactivated and spills in our watershed, we want to be able to contain that so it never reaches our intake pipes. And so we practice those with tabletop and live drills on every other year. We conduct a variety of lake management. You know, when this plan was written, hydrilla was not an issue. It's an invasive plant species if you're unaware. And you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, all those dark blobs are hydrilla actively growing in our main reservoir. And the problem is when that dies and releases all those nutrients that it had brought up from the soil and puts those back into the water column, it can create algae blooms and all kinds of issues in our treatment process. So we had to come up with a new lake management plan to address that hydrilla growth and any future invasive species. And you'll see our team there treating it on the upper left and now on the right, you know, if after 4 years of active management, we have no active hydrilla reaching the surface in our reservoir. And when we do some fun things, we have some old sunken sailboats that, you know, likely have lead keels, and we wanted to remove those from our source water. And we have an excellent diver, a master diver on staff as one of our IT guys, and he rigs those sailboats, floats them to the surface, and then we can haul those out and dispose of them properly, rather than the ways they disposed of them decades ago. And then one of the things that I'm passionate about and my background's about is we talk about our forest management. And in 2021, we became the first water utility to seek a Sustainable Forestry Initiative certification for land management. It's a third-party audit showing that when we conduct timber sales and ecological timber thins, that we're doing those to the best environmental standards for sustainability. And you can see obviously a thin stand on the left and an unthinned plantation style ownership from an industrial owner on the right side. You know, and we've known forest management has been recommended since the inception of our utility and the predecessor of our current utility. Here's a map from the 1960s where the Forestry Commission at the time defined our forest stands, and recommended managements for each unit. But sadly, we did not have the staff capacity at the time, or it wasn't a priority, to enact that plan. And luckily, those times have changed. And the goals of our prescribed fire program and ecological thinning are to reduce that total organic carbon on the landscape, because that can combine with the chlorine in the treatment process and create some disinfection byproducts. We want to improve the water filtration and have those resilient forests that I mentioned. And we do that with a variety of partners. You see their logos, just some of their logos listed on this slide below. So for our forest management, I realize that not everyone's from the Southeast, but these are fire dependent systems. They evolved with fire disturbance over their past. And a lot of the animals and especially conservative plant species in the understory depend on these fire disturbances to germinate. And we need sunlight hitting the forest floor. So we want to take these dense plantations, like the picture on the left, conduct some thinning and some fire treatments, and convert them to these stands on the right that have not just an overstory coverage, but also have a dense understory that create that thick root mass. When rainfall hits, slows down that water, spreads it out, allows it to soak in, and keeps those nutrients on the ground rather than winding up in the lake. Communications has been one of the keys to our successful burning program. And again, I'm relying on the people that came before me. Our forests need fire, and we have a growing wildland and urban interface where people are moving out into the watershed. And so smoke management is one of our biggest issues with conducting these fires safely. I mean, we even have a logo for our fire team, our in-house fire team, our forest fire and faucet scene there. And we have a variety of prescribed burn crew members that I'll talk about in some upcoming slides. Here's just an example of what our burn units look like compared to our ownership around the lake. So we rotate these units. Our historic fire return interval was every 3 to 5 years. So we try to rotate in blocks and from one year burn the block next to it. So we're not refreshing those fire lines so often. We can use the one that was just refreshed in the previous year. And the communication's gotten so good with our local fire departments where when we blast out, we have an email distribution list that our neighbors can sign up for so they know when we're conducting prescribed burns. And when we send it to our fire department, they actually put out notices on their own Facebook and other social media pages saying, hey, we're aware that Central Arkansas is conducting a burn in this area. You don't have to call us, but please do if you see something that you're concerned with. And they work with us to do the communications that we don't have to do anymore. And it's always better coming from a third party than if we have to self-promote. Here's a picture of a couple of our prescribed burn crews, and it's not uncommon for our staff to be outnumbered by some of our partners that are attending there. And we work with both government and non-government organizations, 501c3s and nonprofit organizations. One thing we do in Arkansas better than most places is we cross-train. We train at the same academies, take the same standardized courses, so we can integrate with other burn crews. And when weather parameters are excellent for us to conduct one of our burns, they're able to help us. And then on maybe days where the wind direction or speeds aren't right for us to burn, we can go help them meet their objectives. And we can share that working capacity across our partnerships. We've also incorporated some new technologies and welcome drones into our workplace, even when they're not sometimes allowed for the general public to be flying in places we're allowed to. We've seen all kinds of benefits. We're able to see damages on top of tanks without having to send a climber up there. We even have an underwater drone to check the condition of our pipes and valves and make sure things are in the position they say they are on our SCADA systems. We've seen them benefit, as I mentioned earlier, smoke management is one of the issues, and ignition drones like the ones pictured here on the left, we've gotten to use from some travel crews from the U.S. Forest Service that come in to burn with us. And we had worked on one of our recent grant awards to purchase one of these ignition drones. So we'll be adding that to our toolbox here in the coming months. In 2024, we purchased a thermal viewing drone uh, to help with our prescribed burn program. And so you see a picture here on the right of what we used to see as a fire manager, and on the left is what you see, the same image with the thermal camera, and then you can actually see the fire intensity. You can see if your crew member that's inside the middle of the unit is still lighting their lines, if that fire is actively growing, or is it behaving the way. It allows us to manage the fire intensity and change our ignition patterns so we're not having a catastrophe where if historically the fire was lighting too hot, it may be too late before you notice that to do anything about it. Here we're getting live feedback to our burn bosses where you can see the intensity of that heat based on the whiteness of the image and say, hey, you need to move up that slope and light higher or we're going to roast every tree on that ridge top and actually meet our objectives rather than overshooting them. It helps us improve crew safety. You know, we can see spot fires and not have to go in when they're right next to the road and maybe let that head fire move away and let that smoke clear because it draws public attention. There are people that stop to gawk and look at us doing our work. And I looked up from putting out one of these spot fires and it turned out it was my own family had came to see where I was burning that day. And I was able to tell them, you just can't stop along the road. You're putting our own crew in safety. It was nice to see you. We'll catch up afterward. For recreation and wildlife management, we partner with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. We lease out the majority of our property as a wildlife management area where they invite the public to come in and hunt and fish and bird watch. And we work with them to set regulations that maintain water quality. For example, you're not allowed to waterfowl hunt along the shores of the lake. We didn't want to take the risk of additional shot, even though the majority is non-toxic nowadays. Get entering into our water system. We work with groups like the Friends of the Ouachita Trail. We have this amazing 223-mile hiking trail that walks through our watershed. And what a great opportunity to talk to people about why we protect these forest lands and why this exists, this undeveloped land exists. And so we work with the Friends of the Ouachita Trail to develop some camping shelters along the trail. In the past, we knew people were camping on us. This way, we designate where those areas are at, a safe distance away from tributaries, easier to clean up when it's concentrated in one place. And here's a picture of that newest shelter. And they help us with trail maintenance. They help us at our public access points. And having those allies, those good eyes out on our properties can alert us to problems where our staff may not have time to visit those sites. They provide us feedback and valuable input. We also worked with the Department of Transportation and received a grant to connect 13 and a half miles of hiking and biking trails across the south shore of our reservoir that had historically been difficult for the public to access on purpose. But we'd seen some trails built on neighboring state-owned lands, looked at the low erosion on when trails are built well and designed well. They really don't contribute sediment and much less than the historical road system that was present. So we obtained a grant to put in this trail system. And again, it's another opportunity to get a whole new user group out on our properties, educate them about how and what we do to protect their drinking water and connect them to where their drinking water comes from. So we have one more ally in the future when it comes to knowing where their water comes from. So the major takeaways that I wanted to hit in this limited time that I had to share with you is one, have a plan. But you can't just have a plan because we've had those since the 60s. It really takes that support behind it. And luckily, our utility has strong support from our C-suite. We bring our board out on tours. They regularly ask for updates on our watershed program and are invested in source water protection. And the second point is having that dedicated funding. If you don't have that, maybe that's your first step is work with, like, how can we find some funding? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That if we can spend a little bit of money now on source water protection, it'll save millions in the future on reduced treatment needs and costs. And then the third point is building that staff capacity. You know, these great ideas and projects are wonderful, but if you don't have the staff available to carry them out, then it's pointless to have these plans. We use a variety of methods to increase that capacity. As we mentioned, we put it in grant fundings to have some temporary positions. And if those positions work out well during the course of their grant funding, we build those full-time positions into our budget. You know, that's kind of like a proof of concept time that look what we could do if we just had one extra person dedicated on these projects. Look how much closer we can move that needle towards conserving our lands and making our forests more resilient. And then we use interns and our watershed ambassadors to help with our busy summer projects. And then the fourth bullet is the building of relationships. And those are through these source water collaboratives. We sit on a whole lot of technical committees where, you know, we invest a lot of time at making sure our watershed is listed as a priority in the Forest Action Plan, in our Natural Resource Conservation Service, priority maps for drinking water areas, that we have a voice in those early discussions. So when grant funding opportunities come up, we're able to add that as icing on the cake. Like these areas are identified as high priority areas for source water protection. And then we also have those partners to help us with projects because we can't do these things alone. And I share this picture of a boat ramp. You know, we've got a talented crew. And we had paid a contractor to work with one of our partners to improve one of our boat ramps on the lake. And when we saw the price tag, several of our staff said, I bet with the expertise we have on staff, we could do it as good or better of a job for less money. And so when it came time to do our own boat ramp at our intake facility, we had the expertise, the knowledge, and the willingness to take that on in-house and save the company thousands of dollars in an outside contract fund. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to our next presenter, and we'll take questions at the end.
Yeah, please continue to add your questions. Thanks to those of you who did. We'll see what we can do to get additional answers to those questions. And Paul, if you're ready to go, we can transition over to you, a very different watershed and some different challenges there. But we're going to move up to New England now.
Can you see my slides now, Jeff?
Yep, and it's in the presenter mode. Terrific.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for the opportunity to talk today. This is something I care very much about and work with a lot of really dedicated colleagues who care just as much as I do. The title of my talk is Sebago Clean Waters, and it's really the story of a collaboration that evolved over the last 25 years, and I'd like to talk to you about that. Here's how I organized my talk. First, I'll tell you about the Portland Water District, my company. Then I will talk about Sebago Lake, our source of drinking water. Next, I'll talk about our strategy for protecting Sebago Lake briefly, because then I want to focus on one element of that strategy, which has grown to become what a collaborative known as Sebago Clean Waters. I'll tell you how the collaboration came about, what we've accomplished together in the last number of years, and what I've learned from that process, what we've learned works well or doesn't work well. And then I'll be happy to answer questions. The Portland Water District is Maine's largest water utility. We provide drinking water to about 200,000 people. This is our main office, which was constructed in 1926, a century ago. The roof leaks a little bit, but it's a beautiful building. I think you'd have to agree. In 1908, the Portland Water District was established to take over the assets of the former for-profit Portland Water Company, which began providing water from Sebago Lake in 1869. When the water district took over in 1908, this was the service area, or the area. You can see Sebago Lake up in the upper left, and then Greater Portland is down to the lower right. And the pink area is the area that are the extent of our water distribution system in 1908. We had about 11,000 water services, a service being a connection to a building. We had 11,000 of them then. This is how our service area looks today, like the blob that ate New York. It kind of just grows outward as more communities, more neighborhoods want to connect to the system and get water from Sebago Lake. We've gotten much bigger. We now have we have just over 52,000 water services and provide water to about 200,000 Mainers. To give you a sense of scale, these are our two largest water storage reservoirs, and there's a zoomed in picture of them when the second one was under construction. You can see some trucks down there to give you a sense of scale. Each of those reservoirs holds about 9 million gallons of water, so 18 million altogether. And our customers use about 22 million gallons in a day. So that's just a little less than 1 day's worth of water. There's Sebago Lake, our source of drinking water, and I think you'd have to admit it's one of the prettiest water supplies. You can see this is an image from our new lake map that was taken in the last year. Sebago Lake is a spectacular place and it's used for many, many things. Recreation, there's many year-round homes around it, treasured homes. There are boys and girls camps, there are marinas. And we're drawing water from the southern end of the lake, which is to the lower left here. The lake is 30,000 acres in area. It's more than 300 feet deep at its deepest point. It averages about 100 feet deep over that entire area. So if you just do the math, 30,000 acres times 100 feet deep, to convert that to gallons, you get right around 1 trillion gallons of water, which seems like when I used to say that, it sounded like an infinite amount. Like that's so big, but we've learned from financial collapses of this century that 1 trillion is actually a finite number. And so it is a finite amount, but how does it compare to the amount of water that we need? Well, first of all, if you just want to get a sense of how much water 1 trillion gallons is, if you filled water trucks with Sebago Lake water and stretched them end to end, they would reach from the earth to the moon and back twice, which is a nice thing to tell kids. It's an ooh-ah moment for an ooh-ah lake. But what does that mean in terms of our use? Well, our customers, as I said, consume just about 22 million gallons a day. If you multiply that times 365, you get about 8 billion gallons in a year. But remember, the lake has about 1 trillion gallons. So that means we have about 100 years worth of water in reserve sitting out there as I speak. And that's a very favorable position to be in. I'm quite confident that if you ever pick up a paper and it says Portland short of water, then everyone else is in much worse shape than we are. We're very, very fortunate. We're blessed with this enormous resource. Now, of course, an enormous resource, an enormous amount of water that wasn't very clean, you could still treat it. It would still be usable. But how about if it's really clean? Well, here's how clean Sebago Lake is. This is one way to quickly assess water quality in a lake that many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with, is using what's called a Secchi disc and a view scope like this, where you lower the disc into the water and measure the depth at which it disappears. So you're measuring really the transparency of the water. And when you're providing drinking water, then the more transparent, the better. Right. So here is and we've been doing this for about 50 years. And so here's a chart showing you our Secchi transparency in the lower bay of the lake, where our intakes are from 1975 to present. And each of those red dots is an average of all the measurements that particular year. And so the way to read this is, in that year, in the 1980s or 90s, the average transparency was around 8 meters or 28 or 30 feet or so. And in this particular year, in the 20 teens, it was more like 12 meters. And to give you a sense of how that compares, Maine has some of the most transparent lakes in the whole country. Many spectacular lakes that you would love to have a place to live next to. And most Maine lakes plot in this range between like 5 and 7 meters, which is, again, spectacularly clear. But look where Sebago is. It's almost double that. And here's the 50-year trend. It is not getting worse. It's not getting better either, but it doesn't need to get any better. Our job is really just to keep it as it is because it's doing all that we need. So what does that mean for us? Well, any surface water supply in the United States is required by the Safe Drinking Water Act to do certain treatment to the water before providing it to our customers. And virtually all of surface water suppliers do three things. First, you filter the water to remove particles. Then you disinfect the water. We disinfect our water 3 times. And then you condition the water, add things like corrosion control chemicals, for example, and then you provide it to your customers. So that's like surface water treatment 101. That's what everyone is doing. But Sebago Lake is so clean that it's exempt from filtration, meaning we have a legal exemption. We do not have to filter the water, and we don't. We draw it from the lake and we just disinfect it directly. So we remove that step and disinfect, condition it, and then provide it to our customers. To give you a sense of how rare that is, there are about 13,000 public water supplies in the United States that use surface water, lake or river. About 50 of us don't filter. How important is that to us? Well, our latest estimate, we ask our engineering staff periodically, how much would it cost now the costs keep going up, to build filtration now? And their latest estimate is it probably costs us on the order of $400 million if we ever have to filter Sebago Lake. So that provides just a very important incentive to make sure that never happens, right? So investing some money to ensure that doesn't happen makes very good fiscal sense. So we work really hard, as Arkansas does, Central Arkansas does, to protect this treasured resource that we have. And so I'm going to summarize our source protection strategy in 6 words. We monitor many different ways. We have about a dozen ongoing monitoring programs where we're sampling the tributaries to the lake, in the lake itself, near our intakes, testing for various water quality parameters. And really, that's to keep an eye on how the lake's doing. Just like when you go to the doctor, you get your blood pressure and your height and weight and everything. It's just your doctor she's trying to see, like, how's the patient doing? And we do that same thing. We patrol the lower bay of the lake. We have a no body contact zone established by the Maine legislature. And we've found that if we're not out there patrolling that and being present, then we'll get swimmers in lower bay, and that's not legal. And so we're out there patrolling. We also have some land we own. We own about 2,000 acres of watershed land around the southern end of the lake. And it's open for public access. And so we have to, again, we allow people in for hiking and things, but we need to be out there to make sure that they're treating the land respectfully. We inspect development projects that occur in the shoreland zone of the lake within about 250 feet of the shoreline. Here's one of our scientists inspecting the installation of a septic system. We work to inspire people through outreach events and products. Essentially, what we found is no one is really in favor of a dirty lake. And so when you can engage people and say, here's why this lake is so valuable, here's why the land we own around it is valuable, and here's how you can help us to protect it, we've found a lot of support in that way. We also have found, as Central Arkansas has, that collaborating with so many other organizations to help us to protect the lake is essential, because we just don't have enough people or money or resources to do it. And we don't own and control the lake. It's a shared natural resource. So this list on the left that you're not meant to read, but each year we compile a list of all the organizations that we've worked with in the previous 12 months. And that's just part of a list from one year. We get over 100 organizations in a given year that we are actively collaborating with in some way, again, because no one wants a dirty lake. So there's many, many other organizations that are willing and able to help. And we are working to conserve the forest that carpets the watershed. We are aware that the reason why the lake is so clean, so transparent, and doesn't require filtration is because the watershed is covered with this very healthy forest. About more than 80% of the watershed is forested. So that's the good news. The challenge, though, and I'm going to pivot to the part of the talk that's about Sebago Clean Waters. We figured out, it like hit us in the side of the head in around 2000, that 90% of Sebago Lake's forests were not conserved. In other words, there are healthy forests out there that are naturally treating our water, but they're not protected for us and therefore could be developed, and we could lose our filtration plant. So that began the journey that we've been on for 26 years now till today. And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of my talk. So those last two elements of our source protection program, collaborating and conserving, that's what Sebago Clean Waters is about. So let me just frame the issue as we came to see it. This is an aerial image of Sebago Lake. You can see in the center, and to the east and south of the lake in red, you can see our 1,000 miles of water pipes. That's the distribution system that carries the water to all of our customers. And to the north and west of the lake, you can see in blue all the lakes, rivers, streams, ponds that are carrying water to Sebago Lake. So the yellow line is the watershed of Sebago Lake. It's about 235,000 acres of mostly forested land. So that's the good news, is that it's rural, it's forested, it's healthy. It produces outstanding water quality naturally. Who could ask for anything more? Really, we are blessed both in quantity and quality of the water in the lake. There's some bad news, and as I say, that's what kind of hit us in 2000, is that we don't have any control really over what happens to that land. Only 10% of it was owned by either us, the state, the federal government, or land trusts in 2000. And so a big challenge for us, and this is not a complaint in any way, because I wouldn't want the other alternative, but there is no crisis. The lake is spectacularly clean. It's beloved. It's used for fishing, for boating, boys and girls camps, swimming beaches, and the lake is spectacularly clean. And so, if it was blooming with algae and we called a meeting to say we need to get together to talk about lake protection, people would show up. Of course, they'd be angry, and there would be a huge problem that would be difficult, if not impossible, to solve. But you would get buy-in. In the case of a lake like this, people have real crises and challenges right in front of them happening today. So to inspire people to work and invest time and money to prevent a potential future challenge or crisis is more difficult. Again, I wouldn't trade it, but that is a challenge for us. So this is just a timeline starting in 2000 to present, and then into the future, of how this process has played out. And it began in 2000, and I would love to say this was a grand plan of mine or anybody's, but that's not true. It happened completely by accident. I was new. I'd been at the district for about a year and was working on water quality monitoring and inspecting properties. And a land trust, local land trust, whose service area is in our watershed, was trying to conserve 200 acres of forest, and they were raising money. They were looking for donors, and so they were calling people and saying, can you donate money? We're trying to raise enough money to protect this forest. And I don't know who it was. I wish I knew, but somebody sitting around the table in that land trust meeting said, why don't we ask the water district? Like, they care about Sebago Lake. So again, they approached me actually, and said, can you contribute money? We're trying to conserve forest, and isn't that good for the lake? And I couldn't argue with the logic, but I said, I don't have money. Like, I can't just write you a check. And I talked to my boss ultimately, and he said, well, you can't write a check. You can't authorize that yourself, but the board of trustees could agree to donate money. So went to the board, they agreed to donate money. And here's me, young me, handing off a $10,000 check to the land trust. And if you'd met me the day after this and said, so how's work going? I would have said, oh, you wouldn't believe it. The coolest thing happened. We were able to help a land trust conserve 200 acres of forest. And I felt like, check that box, done. I felt so good about it. Turns out that was just the first step, because if you're a land trust and you approach a potential donor, and say, could you help us to do this? And they say yes, and they write you a check. What are you going to do the next time you have a piece of property and you're trying to raise money? You're going to ask the same organization. And so they kept coming back, and this went on for a decade or so. And by the time we got to 2012, it was clear that we needed some kind of, we were just doing this kind of on an in an ad hoc way. And my boss at the time said, we really should have a policy that defines how much we would give and why we would give more to this project or that one. So we did that. We worked for a year or so and developed this policy. And that 25% is just to summarize the policy in one number, which is our board agreed that they would contribute up to 25% of the value of any land conservation project in the watershed that was going to conserve forest. And, that was really important because it sent a signal to the land trusts in the watershed, and there's 4 of them. And they now knew we can kind of pencil in, not that the board votes on everyone and they could say no, or they could reduce the amount, but like it gave them a signal that this is what we're willing to contribute. And really the number was random, but it was based on the idea that we're not the only beneficiaries of conserved forest in the watershed. The water district is one beneficiary, but there are many others. And so our message back to the land trusts is, we will help you, but you have to find other donors. And they did that spectacularly, so that by the time we got to 2017, we were up to 12% of the watershed conserved from 10, which sounds very small. And you might say, what's the big deal? The next slide, I'll show you some of the actual numbers. But in 2017, something kind of magical happened. And that is that other organizations kind of started approaching us one after another, starting with the Nature Conservancy, and then others followed suit. And they said, we love what you're doing. You're doing things that we support. How can we help you? And the reason why other organizations started approaching us is that they saw, they know it's not a new idea, that healthy forests don't just produce clean drinking water, they produce all these other benefits. And so there are other organizations who are dedicated to this. Their whole organization is about protecting forest and land. And they saw what we were doing. They said, we love that a water utility and land trusts are partnering. We want to help you. And that was transformative because these other organizations have skills and knowledge and money and things that we didn't have in the ad hoc partnership we had. And we came up with a name. It took like 3 meetings of moving words around until we came up with Sebago Clean Waters is what we're going to call ourselves, and a logo. And that really did change the landscape for us. So from 2017 to present, a lot more has happened. This is a slide summarizing what Sebago Clean Waters became. There's our logo in the center, and these are the organizations, 11 nonprofits that make up the partnership. And there's 4 that are land trusts. There's 4 that are regional conservation organizations. There's 1 lake association. There's a national estuary program that provides valuable support. And then there's 1 water utility. So the 11 of us kind of are different. We kind of are skilled in different ways and have different resources, but we're all pulling in the same direction because at the end of the day, we all want to see conserved forest in the watershed. So that's 2017. A lot happened then. One of the key things was that we got funding from the National Endowment for Forest and Communities of $350,000. Until 2017, we'd been doing all this work. We all had full-time jobs, and we were just doing this in addition to that. And we were able to get funding and hire dedicated staff. So there are now 3 staff people who are Sebago Clean Waters staff, and the rest of us are representing our various organizations. So we have a whole bunch of resources and ability and capability, but 3 dedicated staff now. And now, 9 years later, we've moved the watershed from 12% conserved in 2017 to 18% conserved. And our goal is to get to 25% conserved by 2032. It doesn't sound like much, maybe, but I'll just put it into terms of acres. We started with 23,500 acres of conserved forest in the watershed. By 2017, it was at 27,700 acres. It's now at 42,200 acres, and our goal is to get to almost 60,000 acres of conserved forest by 2032. Once you have a logo and you can start talking about yourself and you can tell people what you're doing, and we've been able to attract lots of businesses who support what we're doing and provide funding and or social media attention and or a space for an event where we can share with the public what we're doing. Lots of, everybody pitches in the way that they can. So here's some of our business partners. Many breweries really value, it's their water. It's the water that makes up their beer. But the idea that we're conserving the forest that naturally filters the water just resonates with people. And so other groups like health providers and others just say, this is what a healthy community, what a healthy state looks like. We support what you're doing. Once you form, one thing, water utilities can do certain things, but, we have partners now who are really good at things like building websites and doing social media and just getting the word out there. In fact, when we first, but when Sebago Clean Waters began approaching businesses and asking, would you be willing to contribute? More than one said, well, we love what you're doing, but no one's ever heard of you. Like, they've all heard of the United Way, so we can get behind that, but like, your name isn't known. And so one thing we do is try to get our logo, our name out there. And that's been working because we have more donors than ever. The Nature Conservancy commissioned a study by the University of Maine that summarized, that evaluated, the value, the benefits of forest conservation. And the conclusion of the study in one sentence is that $1 invested in forest conservation in the watershed produces $8 in benefits. A group of filmmakers approached us and said, we love this. We want to tell the story of the water from the top of the watershed all the way to the sea. And this film, which there's a link to it, I think, in the chat, is about 20 minutes long, and it interviews people along the way, including representatives of Sebago Clean Waters and other organizations that are working to protect the water from when it lands on the ground at the very northern tip of the watershed all the way to Casco Bay in Portland. Some of the breweries actually put our logo on their can to tell people who we are and what we're doing, and then they donate a percentage of their profits to the partnership. So these last few slides, I just want to share with you some of the impact of what this has meant. So there's a lot on this slide, but really it's just showing you starting in 2000 over on the left all the way to 2025. The height of each those blue bars is how many acres were conserved that year, and the number at the top is how many different deals that was. And so you can see that in 2021 we had this miraculous event where a landowner with more than 10,000 acres of forest, most of it in the watershed, decided that they wanted to protect it and conserve it for all time. So we purchased an easement on that land. Such a big bar that we had to chop it because otherwise the bar would go off the top of the screen. But 7,700 acres of forest were conserved that one year in that deal, plus two other smaller ones. I'm kind of prouder of 2023 because even though it was more like 1,700 acres of forest, it was 7 deals, and deals are complicated. There's landowner wishes, there's donor wishes. There's so many moving parts, and to get 7 of them to close all in one year was stunning to me. And that's the work of so many dedicated people. It's just astonishing to me what people can accomplish working together, kind of pulling, like I say, the rope in one direction. So just you can see the impact of a collaborative. This is before Sebago Clean Waters. There was a collaborative. It was the land trusts and the water district working together. But look what's happened since the coalition formed, and we brought other people with other skills and other resources to the table. I like to say we're like a Swiss Army knife, and sometimes a need comes up and the water district is perfectly positioned to say, well, we could do that. We have the staff to do that, or the money or the resources. And then other times it's like, we couldn't do that. But then a land trust says, well, we think we could get that done. And everyone brings a different skill to the table, but we're all with the same goal. This is just a quick slide to show you that like deals are like snowflakes. Every one of them is different. They're all white and cold, but each snowflake, when you look under a microscope, is different. Each deal is a little bit different. It's sort of the funding. So the different colors here show you the pie chart shows you how the funding breaks down for these 3 deals. We've done 38 of them, and this is just 3 I picked out. Mill Hill was $3 million deal. And you can see most of the funding came from public sources like the Land for Maine's Future Fund and other things. And then there's PWD's piece, which is on the order of 20%. The landowner donated some, and then there's some private donors. And so each one, the point is just that everyone gets pieced together depending on what the landowner wishes are and what the land trust has for resources and what grants are available and what donors can give. And that's why 7 of them closing in 1 year was so astonishing to me. I'm near the end here. This just shows you where we were in 2000 with the watershed with 211,000 acres of privately owned forest. You can see in dark green there, and then the gray ones were already conserved at the time. And then you can see down at the very southern end of the lake, there's a little light green collar. That's water district owned land as of 2000. But now it breaks down like this, where now you can see there's many more conserved parcels in the watershed, and we're up to 18%. We still have 193,000 acres of private land. So if you want to donate, please do. I work with water utilities all the time, and sometimes I get partnering, collaborating. It's so time consuming and complicated, and there's meetings and agendas and minutes. Why don't we just do it ourselves? And this slide is to show you why we don't try to do this ourselves as Portland Water District. This is showing you since 2000 the cumulative spending in the Sebago Lake watershed on forest conservation. And you can see that PWD has contributed about almost $3 million. Well, that's a lot of money to invest, but look what the partners have raised to support that over that same time period. I'll answer a lot of emails for that much money, I'll tell you that. Okay, so here's some things that doing this for 25 years have taught us. One thing is that nobody's really against this. If many of you, I'm sure, are in the job of conserving forests, conserving land, conserving natural resources, you don't really meet people who think that's a bad idea. They might not love everything, everything you're trying to do or how, but everyone is in favor of this. Certainly Mainers are. And so I've given lots of talks about this, and I never really get anyone raising their hand and saying this is a bad idea. So the mission, it's like motherhood and apple pie. Everyone likes the idea of protecting the Maine woods because it's good for water quality. So that's a great thing to be able to, doors always open when we ask. And another thing is that even though, there was that one deal that was 12,000 acres of forest, 7,700 of them in the watershed, even a 12-acre deal matters fully to that owner. And therefore, I like to say, I love them all like children. Like, everyone is important. Take them seriously. This owner's wishes matter as much as the big landowner's wishes do. Another thing that has been clear to me after this time is that, when I first started in this kind of work, I would say, wow, here's how that organization could help us. Let's ask them. And you'd go to people and say, I'm from the Portland Water District, and would you help us do this? And, sometimes people would, because, it's Sebago Lake, it's Portland Water District, why not? But if you can figure out what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish, and what is it that we, the Portland Water District, or we Sebago Clean Waters, could do to help that organization reach their goal, if it's a complementary goal, well, they're going to answer the phone when we call and say, here's what we need. And so being a partner really is both giving and receiving. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And it really is magical when you see it happening. Next thing I would say is that when I look now at what Sebago Clean Waters and the partners have accomplished, it's awe-inspiring to me. 18,000 acres of conserved forest. I never would have conceived of that at the beginning. I thought 200 acres was great, and I was excited. But I really think there was something to be said for taking one step at a time. Like if someone had said, if I had said, or anyone had said in 2000, let's aim for 18,000 acres of conserved forest, everyone would have walked away and said, kind of crazy, but there was 200 acres. Let's get that conserved. And when you get some success on something even relatively modest, from standing at that perspective now, hey, this worked, we got together, we shook hands, we're congratulating one another. Then you look at the next thing that's a little bigger and it seems achievable. And then the very last thing I'll say about a partnership is that sometimes, even though we are complementary partners, 11 organizations working together, not everything is like 100% agreement. And we had an issue about 5 or 6 years ago where a couple of the partners saw things one way and a couple saw it another way. And I was thinking, how can we make this happen? How can we get through this disagreement? And one of my colleagues called me, and he such a wise insight. He just said, Paul, the collaboration of the partners, the bonds between the partners matters more. Like conserving that and protecting that matters more than any individual project right in front of us. So if we have to walk away from this project in order to keep the partnership strong, we should do that. And I wish I had thought of that myself, but I had to have it like explained to me, and we got through that. And it really does matter. You have to trust the people you're coming to the table with, because everyone is risking something to collaborate. And that's my last slide, and happy to answer any questions.
Wow. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Brian. Yes, a virtual round of applause for the speakers. Thank you both for sharing your insights here. We've got a lot of questions and not a huge amount of time, but we do have this time together until 2:30. So I think we should try to go ahead and make some attempts to answer some of these questions. But before we do that, I want to just make sure that everybody knows that we'll be sharing the recording. We will be sharing links. We received some links from both Paul and Brian related to some of the work that they're doing, which are in the chat right now, but we'll also include those, I believe, in a follow-up email to all of you about this webinar. And we'll do that because some people who signed up for the webinar didn't get a chance to actually participate today, but they'll probably listen to it later. So in the time that we have remaining, let's dig into some of these questions and see if we can at least answer a few for the people here on the phone. One question I wanted to start with had to do with some of the social aspects of this work. And it really gets at how are you engaged with the public? I mean, Paul, it sounded like as you were wrapping up, a lot of support for what it is that you're doing. But for Brian and Central Arkansas Water, there was a question about how was community support on the added surcharge that you got passed. How did that come about? And did support increase once those benefits were more recognized? Do you know much about how that all came to be?
So much of that happened before my time with utility. But it was born out of the stakeholder involvement of our watershed management plan being formed, that they were willing to protect that resource, kind of like Paul mentioned, Maine loves forests and water. He said something like that. And Arkansans appreciate natural beauty. We're the natural state. And sometimes you got to put your money where your mouth is. And they just, there were that optics of, at the time, 45 cents a month, you too could save a watershed in your local community. It just was a good small nominal fee. But when you have 179,000 metered connections, that adds up, and then all of our wholesale customers. And so we haven't had any pushback recently from that, even when it increased to the 90 cents several years ago. And still don't get many questions about it.
And Paul, in your watershed, how it sounds like people are supportive of this, but do you get any pushback on protecting land within the watershed because it takes it away from potential development or anything like that?
Well, that's a theme, I think, in almost any place. When land is being conserved, the question becomes, what about tax revenues? And that has been brought up in Maine in recent years, not about our work in particular, but just generally. It's been brought up, and it hasn't really become a movement or anything. Or land trusts are tax exempt in Maine, for example, but our land trusts have chosen, not because of this partnership, but even before they knew about us, they chose to pay property taxes even though they're exempt from them, for that very reason, that they want to be welcomed in their communities. They live in those communities. Those, land trusts are local people who volunteer a lot of their time to make to protect land in their communities. And so our land trust partners, one thing about our situation that you could see, and I think it's similar in Central Arkansas, the land that's in the watershed land is over here and the customers are over there. And that can create an us versus them thing. So we're very mindful of that. And this is why we are working with the land trust, because they are local. And so they are able to, they're connected to those communities. And I think, your question about, is there pushback? I think because we're trying to get from 10% conserved to 25% conserved, if we were trying to get to 75% conserved, then I think you could start to get those questions. But essentially what we're trying to do is development is going to happen. We know that we need jobs, we need houses. So that will happen. Let's have conservation proceed apace, so that as development is happening, so is conservation. And really, and it resonates with people to say, these houses are going to be built in the watershed, businesses are going to be established. Those new residents are going to want to live near the woods. That's why we're all living in Maine, is because of the woods. And so far, I would say that I haven't sensed any real pushback locally from what we're trying to do. I think we're still very much in line with what the communities want for themselves.
Great. So let's dig in a little bit to the planning work, because again, this is about how do you go from plan to implementation, essentially. There was a question about, specifically for Sebago, how you set that forest conservation acreage goal, how you came up with it, because it sounds like you've got the longer term and then you've got the near term. But how do you know, or how did you decide how much you ultimately wanted to protect to maintain your filtration avoidance determination?
It's a great question, and I will say that the same study that showed that $1 worth of $1 invested in the watershed is worth $8 in benefits, also concluded that the watershed, to maintain the high water quality of Sebago Lake, should be more than 75%, sort of 75, 76%. That's like what we refer to as the tipping point. If we get below that in forest cover, healthy forest cover, we're going to start to see changes in water quality that we don't want. So it begs the question, if you need 76% of the watershed to be healthy forest, why is your target 25% for conservation? And the answer is twofold. One is, the study didn't say 76% of the watershed forest needs to be conserved forest. It said it needs to be healthy forest. And so we see that the sort of the portfolio of a healthy Sebago Lake watershed is conserved land, privately owned land, well managed, and developed land, all three. And so we felt like the conserved part was so low that was like sort of scarily low. And if we can get that to 25%, it means we still have lots of work to do. And we're doing that now, to work with private landowners who don't want to conserve their land and may never want to, but we're working with them on forest management planning and other things, because and again, if you own a wood lot, you want it to be healthy forest too. So we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. But the 25% was kind of a random number. You could have said 30, could have said 22, could have said 40, but it was sort of like, let's put a line in the sand that we can aim for that seems plausible and doable. And so some have said to me, well, what if you don't reach that goal? And I say, well, if we get from 10% to 23% and we don't quite get to 25, haven't we done a great thing? And then we just sit down then and say, well, here's where we are. We're at 23% conserved. Do we want to go further, or do we want to not work on conservation as much and shift to forest management? And those are all decisions that will be made at that time. But it really has been a really important thing to set that sort of stake in the ground and say, how are we going to get to that? Because a goal really helps you to say, are we doing enough? Should we do more? Do we have the resources to do that? So it really isn't, there's nothing magic about that number, I would say.
Okay. And Brian, for you, I mean, you obviously have done a bunch of planning. You have a different system. How did you guys, come up with your numbers in terms of what you want to own, what you want to see protected, what you want to see managed within your watershed?
That's a great question. So, and I failed to mention it during my presentation. Lake Mel right now is about 44% conserved. And we define that as either under our ownership or U.S. Forest Service ownership. So those are places we know are going to remain forest just by the nature of their owners. And like Paul mentioned, we don't have to own every acre of forest so long as it's protected. And we have some other tools. One of our counties passed a zoning ordinance that required developers to offset their development with a certain amount of protected forest lands. And there's some it's called a site evaluation tool calculator that says, okay, if you're creating this much impervious surface on this type of soils, you need to create this many square feet of forest land to offset that. So we don't have to be the ones to own it. They can own some through that. We can own it through conservation easements and a variety of other tools. But again, we're looking at that same 70% sweet spot of maintaining at least 70% forested condition in our watershed for long-term health.
Great, great. That's helpful. There was a question about sticking on the money part a little bit here. There was a question about whether or not the sources for funding are the investments into the fund purchasing land soft money. So I'm trying to interpret that a little bit. I'm assuming that you have grants, but you also have this dedicated surcharge. So I'm struggling a little bit with answering that one. But you do have flexibility with the funds that you've got to purchase land in both cases, right?
Well, in our case, ultimately and sort of the most important thing from the water district's perspective in this effort is there were land trusts already operating in the watershed for decades before this began that were working to identify willing landowners who wanted to conserve their land, work out the financing, and either purchase the land in fee or easement to protect it. And so all we're trying to do is help both the landowners that want to do that and the land trusts that want to help them to do that and to be their partner. So at the end of the day, the water district really doesn't own anything, including the responsibility of stewardship of the land, which is really a big selling point. If we said if the land that Sebago Clean Water's partners have conserved over the last 25 years with our support, if we were owning that either in fee or easement, we would need more staff. Like, that's a lot of work, and the land trusts they're the ones who are taking on that responsibility. So they're such valuable partners to us, both because they make the deals happen, but then they also manage the land. And so we try really hard to just say, because some donors will put limits or put conditions. If you're going to use our money, you have to do these certain things. And people have said, does the district do that? And the answer is no, except it has to remain forested. But we're not going to prescribe how that's done. We leave that to the landowner, the land trust, and other donors who might have conditions. Because we thought if we just add a whole nother set of conditions, the land trust is going to have to comply with us and others. And sometimes deals fall apart because the land trust can't possibly meet all the conditions of all the donors. So we try to just be a silent partner and provide funding, provide support. And we just say, as long as you tell us that this legally you'll never be able to cut down all the trees, then we're in favor of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think we got a little more clarity on this too. There's specifically looking at whether or not there are private investors that have put money into these watersheds with the intent of seeking some kind of rate of return. And so I'm going to say I don't think that's the case in your watershed, Paul, but in your case, Brian, with the green bond, I think that is part of the deal. Right? By issuing a bond, you've got investors who ultimately will get paid back.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So let me pose this question then to both of you. Where do you start if you don't have a dedicated funding source to match grants and fund projects?
You want to go first, Brian?
You want to go first?
I think there's where you rely on your partnerships and you find people that are looking for that work to do. And for us, providing the land base to the game and fish, like they wanted to have a place for people near our large population center to recreate. And at the time, between our land and lakes, we had about 15,000 acres there. And we sold them a long-term lease agreement where they could lease those recreation rights. And, it provided us some income, it provided them a place. And then, like Paul mentioned, they're the ones actually doing the work of enforcement and overseeing those game rights and our access things. And they work cooperatively with us. So it was a great way that, for us not to expend any funds again, gain another group of public supporters. Now we're also offering these hunting opportunities for them. And they love the management that we do around our lake because it's great for most of the wildlife species they're chasing after. So find a good partner.
Yeah, and I think I would put it this way from what, I said in my presentation, this wasn't like a grand plan that the water district laid it all out and then we've implemented it or we've executed and here it is. It kind of happened organically, but as I look back on it, if I was starting from the beginning, um, knowing what I know now, like in another place, I would say, well, I'd start by saying, if you work for a water utility and you're trying to think of how to protect your source, what is it that you'd love to accomplish, but you just can't see how you could do it alone? What do you need partners for? What do you wish you had help doing? And then, then figure out who they are in your area, and then I would say that's enough thinking on your alone. Now you should sit down with these partners and say, we're coming to talk to you because we think we have some shared interests here, and find out what they're trying to do. And if you can figure out what resources you have that will help them, if you're helping them meet their goal while they're helping you meet yours, those are the meetings or the partnerships that are going to grow and they're going to get stronger and they're going to do more things. If it's really only benefiting you, they might help you out if they have extra time, but they're not going to, it's not going to be in a priority for them. So I really think it's that figuring out who is a likely partner and then sitting down with them and saying, so what are you guys trying to do that we might be able to help you with? And I think it would grow from there.
Great. That's great advice. And also the retrospective on even, going back and thinking now that you've been doing this for 25 years, what would you tell people starting out on their own for the very first time with this?
Yeah, pick a goal that's achievable. Don't start out by saying, we want to control 44% of the watershed in Central Arkansas's case. If you only were at 10%, like that's just so way out there that everyone would just say, I don't have time for it. Like that's just like going to the moon, and I can't possibly do that. But if you say we want to protect this area which everyone is interested in, how can we do that? Nothing really breeds more success than doing something successfully and shaking hands afterwards and saying, wow, that went really well. You also get to know, is this a good partner? Can we work well together? You figure that out by doing something modest, and then you aim for something bigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. I know there's a whole bunch of questions about management, which I think are largely directed toward Brian because you talked the most about prescribed fire and so forth. But I wonder if in the few minutes we could get into a few of those.
Yeah.
So there was a question here about emergency response, specifically focusing on pipeline rupture and spill response. What other emergency responses have you prepared for? And I guess that could be something, Paul, you could address as well. But how about we start with Brian?
Yeah, so that was just the most recent exercise. We also prepare for, we have major highway bridges going over our lake, so we prepare for tanker spills, even though there are regulations against, we also have regulations that protect spills that prohibit hazardous materials from being transported on that section of state highway. We prepare for things like if a plane, we're near our major airport in the state. If a plane were to have to land in the lake, how would we address that? And we meet with all the emergency response partners and do tabletop exercises with them. We prepare for dam ruptures. Since they are man-made reservoirs, they could potentially fail at some point. And then even small case spills about, a trailer gets rear-ended that was hauling expanding foam and unleash some chemicals that we don't want in our water. So yeah, we have a variety of things that we prepare for. And I'll answer another quick one. We don't have any trouble with any invasive mussels at this point. And then someone asked about what do we do for hydrilla treatment? And we do a combination of drawdowns and then chemical applications of Sonar One. It's a fluoridone treatment that we've done now about 4 years in a row, both granular release and injection trailer upstream. And it's had excellent hydrilla control and very little residuals by the time it gets into our drinking water.
And going up onto the land with the fire, again, getting back to that, balancing the need for prescribed fire with negative impact to water quality from the burn? I mean, are you seeing that? I know out west there's often a lot of hesitation about wildfire, but we were talking about this in preparation for this call. The southeast has fire dependent systems too, and you're doing it. So how did you balance all that?
Yeah, great question. So, our forests are going to burn. Do we want them to be a catastrophic fire when conditions are at their extremes, or do we want to do it when it fits our prescription window and we'll reach our objectives if we burn it in known weather parameters? And from there, we have done some water tests on runoff from our prescribed burn sites, and we see no noticeable change in that immediate water quality after our burns. And we also, make the argument about the scale. Some of our largest burns around Lake Maumelle are 1,000 acres. Well, on an 88,000 acre watershed, we're only impacting 1% of the watershed with that particular burn. And we're just burning some of that organic material because we are doing it at a time we select. And we gain so much in benefit over time from that rapid nutrient cycling that it's an easy case for us that prescribed burning benefits our forests.
And do you, to put a finer point on that, do you have any data that gets at avoided costs due to the source water protection work that you're doing? I don't know if I'm kind of morphing that, but to see what I'm getting, yeah.
I do see what you're getting at, and we don't have any direct numbers on how to put figures to that. Like Paul mentioned, there are several studies out there that show multiple fold benefits from these source water protection measures, and we just don't have the capacity to do that type of direct feedback from our actual management. So we just rely on neighboring studies.
Mm-hmm. And to echo that, we're trying to prevent the decline of water quality. We do have some sense of what it would cost if water quality declines because we know what it would cost to filter. But we're trying to avoid a bad thing, not remediate. If you're remediating, it's easier, I think, to quantify the benefits because you can see like improved water quality. You could measure that. We're just trying to not see a decline in water quality. So, but I will say that it really did make a big difference when we had the study done that concluded that 76% of the watershed, as long as it was healthy forest, we would not see water quality declines. Our board heard that, and that was years ago. And still, when we bring a new deal to the board to say, here's the next deal and here's what they're asking for, they say, how close are we to the tipping point again? Like people really respond to numbers. And, we know that and they know, I've told them that that's a model. That doesn't mean exactly if we get to 75.9%, forest, we're going to be a disaster. And if we're at 76.1, it's perfect. But it provides a way of saying, let's work to keeping the forest, 76% of the forest healthy. We all agree that's a good idea, and we can measure progress toward that. And so it's not exactly like a measuring tool like you could if you were cleaning something up or stacking something up. It's a different kind of thing, but it really, the board feels it, they see it, and they support it because the concept makes sense to everybody. And the last thing I'll say is that some have said, well, Paul, what if we put all this money into trying to avoid filtration, and then for some reason out of our control, we have to filter? And I always say, you'd rather filter a lake that is cleaner than a lake that's dirtier. So that benefit of source protection we'll still be benefiting from it every day, even though we'll have to invest in filtration.
Yep. Terrific. Good message. Well, I knew it was going to happen. We've basically run out of time and we haven't answered all of the questions. But I want to thank you both again. And I also want to give you both one opportunity for a last word. So Brian, why don't we start with you? Any last words, any last things that you wanted to convey to the audience here?
I just appreciate the opportunity to share our story at Central Arkansas Water, and my information's in the chat. If there's a really burning question that we didn't get to that you'd like to hear my opinion on, I'm happy to share it. And thanks again for sitting through this presentation.
And thank you. And Paul.
I'm nearly I'm nearly done with my working life, which is a funny feeling, but I will tell you that something that I think about all the time, and I've said this to people along the way, that this is what I think about when I'm working on this. And I know I'm speaking to an audience of conservation minded people. So I know that I believe this will resonate with you. But what I think about is when we're working on this is 100 years from now, there's going to be two people walking through the woods in the watershed, holding hands and enjoying the day. And one will say, wow, this is such a beautiful place that we're hiking on. How did it ever get here? And the other one's going to go, I have no idea. And I just love that we're anonymous. We're all working on this. No one is benefiting, no one's profiting. We are doing this for this generation, for the next generation, and it will matter. And it doesn't matter. We're just part of a group. There's no individuals. It's just a team of people working for the common good. And that just feels, to me, that's what makes going to work worthwhile, is doing things for the common good anonymously.
Well, like it or not, Paul, I think we have to admit that you have helped to inspire a bunch of the people, not only on this call, but also in the past years that you've been working on this, to do more for source water protection throughout New England and perhaps across the country as well. And so I just want to highlight one of the things that Kyra put into the chat here, which is that we now have a Northeast Mid-Atlantic Partnership for Forests and Water, which parallels the Southeastern Partnership, which has been around for many years. This new Northeast Mid-Atlantic Partnership for Forest and Water will take us all the way up and down the eastern, part of the United States, talking about the importance of forests and water. So thank you for that. And thanks to all of you for attending this webinar. And we hope you're suitably impressed and inspired or hopeful that you might have heard something that you could use in your own watershed or your state program. And once again, we'll follow up with this with a recording, a copy of these slides, and an announcement for our next webinar. Please do sign up for the Source Water Collaborative and Southeastern Partnership e-newsletters on our websites. And I neglected to show you let me see if I can share my screen real quick and get this last slide up there for you. So you can see those websites, so you can go ahead and sign up. And we hope to see many of you again on a future Source Water Collaborative webinar. May the source be with you. Take care.
Thank you.